Brought to you by our exclusive fabric partners. Be sure to look for their newest lines of fabric.
Hi, welcome to Quiltmaker's Block Network. I'm Carolyn Beam with Quiltmaker magazine. Today I'm going to show you how to make stepping stones. This is block number 771, designed by Lynn Roddy Brown for Quiltmaker's 100 Blocks Volume 8. This is a very simple block made with triangles, so I'm going to show you how to make the block and then also some different methods for making triangle squares. To make this scrappy block, you're going to need 16 different light fabrics, prints or torn on tones work, and 12 different dark fabrics. You can find the cutting dimensions to the right of your screen. If you'd like to write these down, please pause your video now. To make this block as scrappy as this one is here, you'll need to cut each of your squares into triangles like this, and you'll only use one of the triangles for each fabric, and then you can save the additional triangles that you have cut to make other blocks. So the first thing you'll need to do is to randomly pair up your triangles and sew them into units like this. Then you will sew the units together along with a square to make each of the 4 different rows. And notice that the square changes position to make a diagonal line as your block is sewn together. So once you sew the 4 different rows, then you'll go ahead and sew them together. Now I'd like to show you a few different ways to cut triangles and to make these triangle square units. The first method I'm going to show you uses the easy angle ruler. And to use this ruler, you're going to take 2 strips of fabric, and the width you cut them is the finished measurement of your triangle plus 1/2 inch. So for our 3-inch finished triangles, we cut the strip 3.5 inches. So we're going to layer the 2 strips, right sides together. And the first thing I want to do is just make sure that my edge here is straight. So I'm lining the ruler up to check for a straight edge. And the nice thing about using this rotating mat is now I can flip it over to the right side where I'll need it to cut the first triangles. So you'll notice that the ruler has a flat tip, and I'm going to line that up with the length of the fabric strips and the straight edge along the side, and I'm going to cut the first 2 triangles. Now you notice that these triangles have a flat tip on one end and a point on the other. You really don't need to cut this tip off. You can take it to your sewing machine, putting the flat end into your sewing machine, and you don't have to worry about the little dog ears getting caught in the bottom of your sewing machine. So it's a great way to cut 2 triangles together as one and have it all ready to go to your sewing machine. You can continue cutting triangles across the width of this strip by just repositioning the ruler, again with the flat part cut off on the length of your fabric. And now I'm going to have a straight line again on the other side, and I'm going to cut right along the edge of the ruler. And you end up with another pair that has the tip cut off, ready to feed into your sewing machine. Another method I'd like to share with you is using bias strips to cut finished triangle squares. So these strips are all cut on the bias, and kind of a general rule of thumb that I use for knowing how wide to cut the strips is the finished size of the triangle square. So it's finishing at 3 inches, so each of my strips is cut 3 inches. You'll need a square ruler that has a diagonal line down the middle and your rotary cutter. So now if you look at this, it's kind of an odd way that these are all oriented at the bottom, but when I start cutting my finished triangle squares, I usually will look for the lowest point where 2 strips come together to form a point, and I'll start with the lowest one. So you'll take your ruler. Now we're cutting 3.5 inch triangle squares. So I'm going to line up my diagonal line directly on the seam line and make sure that my 3.5 inch line is on the fabric strip, so I can slide it down just a little bit more. And you'll notice it does overhang another strip, and that's fine. So you'll make your cut. You'll cut just beyond the point, not too far, and then cut back the other way. And you have 2 sides of a triangle square cut. Now what I usually do is travel back and forth across the strips, cutting just 2 sides, and then I'll go back and trim the other side. So let me show you a couple more. So again, I'll look for the lowest point, and it appears to be this one. One of these 2 would be just fine. Line up the diagonal line right on the center, on the seam line, and make sure the 3.5 mark is within the fabric, and cut 2 sides of the triangle. And don't worry about cutting into strips on either side. So once in a while, you just need to trim that extra thread at the top. And I would keep doing this, moving across the fabric. Let's try this one next. Diagonal line on the seam line, 3.5 inch line on the fabric, and cut 2 sides. And once you've gone back and forth cutting as many as you can, then it's time to trim the other 2 sides of your triangle squares. So just flip the whole pile over, and starting with one at a time. Now you can line the 3.5 inch marks on those two lines that you cut. Again, your diagonal line on the seam line, and cut the other 2 sides. And you have a finished triangle square. Let me try it again with one more, just to show you how that's done. 3.5 inch ruler lines on your cut edges, diagonal line on your seam line, and you'll cut the remaining 2 sides. So you have your finished triangle square unit that's ready to put into your quilt. Now the nice thing about sewing your pieces, alternating light, dark, and randomly mixing up colors, is you have the opportunity to make a triangle square that uses this print here with the red, and again with this print in the red. So it mixes up your fabrics a little bit and gives you more of a scrappy look. So let's look at some quilt designs using this block. Here's a 4x4 setting with the blocks all in the same orientation. So you see diagonal bands of color going across your quilt. Now the nice thing about this block is you can use some of the same arrangements that you would use for a log cabin quilt because of the diagonal line that you see going down the middle of the block. So here's one that's like the sunshine and shadows variation. Rotating blocks again, you can get this design, which looks like the barn raising arrangement. And finally, by rotating the blocks, you can get a design that looks like the streak of lightning. You can find stepping stones and 99 other very interesting blocks in Quiltmaker's 100 Blocks Volume 8. Thanks for joining us on Quiltmaker's Block Network. I hope to see you next time. Very interesting block.
Interesting choice of words, but it was fine.
I know.